Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Through Review 131. Today I'm going to talk about A House Divided, a war between the states 1861 to 65. It's a game from Mayfair Games that just got reprinted this year. Originally came out I think in 1981, at least according to the back of the box. So it's been about 30 years. Now this is a game that I think has gone through some sort of revisions and some different rule changes and things like that. Optional rules added, removed possibly. So the game is presented in a way that is basically a very much an introductory war game. It comes with a very, very basic rule set. It takes place over the whole scope of the war. But even with the basic rule set, there are some little nooks and crannies of theme and chrome and things like that involved. Now, the first time I played it, we just played it basic rules with a couple of minor optional rules that were just kind of we easily fell into adding those because they just made immediate sense. Looking at the rules and trying to get into the game, they kind of fit right away. Now there's a ton of optional rules here, and I'll show you a close-up of this rule book a little bit later, but it can be a little bit sort of overwhelming, I think, to look at this and go, okay, how am I supposed to play this game? Really, should I play the basic with these optional rules or the advanced set with these other optional rules? And the rule book does actually a very good job of explaining each of the different rules. So it's got sort of the traditional war game thing, with like a section and a subsection and things like that. But everything has a nice example with it, and there's some nice little bit of explanation for historical reasoning behind the different rules. But so when I go to explain the walkthrough here, I'm going to kind of dip in and out of the basic rules and the advanced rules and maybe some of the optional rules. I'm not going to go into exhaustive detail because it would take too long and bore you. But I'll give you a little bit of sense of the difference between some of the rules and how easy it is to progress from a basic rule set into more and more advanced rule set. And you can kind of do it in a way that's sort of an educational way in a sense, where you kind of do this basic rule and you go, oh, I could add in the draft riots of 1863 and just add this little extra piece, and then we've got it kind of changes the state of the game a little bit. Or you can do sort of an alternate history rule, like the foreign army of Great Britain possibly coming and actually helping the South, which they apparently had counted on coming but never came because they never did so hot. So just keep that in mind as I go through the walkthrough. So let's jump into that now. So you can see here we've got a large view of the map here set up to start the game. You can see it's point-to-point movement. There's different terrain and sort of movement types that I'll explain here in a second. You got some Confederate units down here in the south, a few up here towards Washington, D.C., and then a good amount of Union units up here at the north. So you can see here we've got a turn track. We've got this little counter here that we're going to flip. So the Union will take their turn, we'll flip to the Confederate, and then we'll go to the next year, flip back to the Union. And then you can see the Union's going to get some reinforcements here as they hit these different months and the different years, and then these leaders are going to come into play for each side. Now you can see here I've got 4 units actually here, and this is if you're using the draft riots optional rule. Otherwise they'll just normally come in at this month and you'll get all 4 of them. But it's easy enough and easily described here on the board to just set them out one by one. So it's not really that much of a stretch and and that much of too big of an exception to really deal with. And you can see here we've got Sherman 2 and Lee 2. Well, these leaders actually have a flip side to them. So you can see here's the 62 version of Lee, and he's got a bonus of 3. And then we've got the 63 version of Lee here, and he's only got a bonus of 2. So these bonuses here will add to the combat strength and combat, which I'll explain in a minute. And again, the leaders are not really part of the basic game either, but they're pretty simple, and you can just go ahead and add them, I would say. So each side is going to have a very simple set of actions that they're going to do on their turn. First, they're going to roll for movement, and that's not as bad as it may sound. And then they're going to have combat. So if any 2 sides are in the same block, so let's say Confederate's turn was here and he moved down here, and then these 2 units would have combat. And then you'll do a quick promotions and recruitment phase. So first, how does movement work? Well, first of all, in the very first turn of the game, each side is only going to get 2 movement points. But most of the time you're going to roll a die and you're going to check what year it is. So I rolled a 2 here. So if I was the Confederates, I would get 2 movement points. If I was the Unions, I would get 3 movement points. And you can see that's actually going to kind of change year to year. Now the basic rules actually do away with this table. You can see this is optional, but I feel like this table does a good job of sort of balancing out the movement per side, and especially it's a little bit of historical flavor as different sides got different advantages, throughout the different years. I mean, it's a little bit abstract, but it sort of deals with the, the problems of communication during this time period of, executing orders to different groups of units throughout the map. So let's say we had 2 movement points on our turn. And what that means is you can activate basically 1 box per movement point. So I can activate this box and move all of these units, along a line. So maybe go along a railroad here, possibly along a river, maybe along a road. You can see that down here at the bottom. Or you can possibly entrench a unit here. So it's possible that I could entrench and then put this little defense modifier on top of the stack of units that are entrenched. So depending on the type of unit, these different connectors are going to treat the unit movement in a different way. So these are infantry units here. You can see, they're standing up, they're walking. Then you've also got cavalry units here. And then you've got the possibility of upgrading your starting infantry here, which is a 2, to a level 3, or the next level of infantry, and then finally to a crack unit, which is a 3 combat rating and sort of a -1 defense rating. So you can see each player gets one of these little sheets here, and these are just paper pretty much, like plasticky sort of glossed paper. And it has the roll table here to see how your movements go, and then you can quickly see how these different types of troops are going to move based on the different paths that they may take. And just real quick, there's a nice turn breakdown, a nice little combat breakdown, and then on the other side, it's sort of an advanced version of this. So let's talk about how these different movement things work real quick. So very simply, infantry can move, if it's moving on a road, just basically 1 space, 1 link. However, if it's on a friendly railroad, it can move up to 2. So I could activate this box here and then move this guy twice, as long as these are friendly controlled boxes along the side there. If you go through a non-friendly, so you can see this railroad is going into a Union area, this blue area, then it can only move once. Likewise, if you're on a river, you can actually move twice too if you're infantry. So you can see you've got 2 river links there, and so you can move there. So the travel is going to be very important in sort of blocking off these sort of quick routes so that you don't get either attacked and then zerged on, if you're either side. Now the cavalry can always move 2 spaces, and the cracked infantry can always move 2 links as well. And that's whether it's friendly or unfriendly control. Now normally you have to stop if you run into enemy forces along the way. So if I wanted to move up these twice here, I couldn't do that. But a cavalry can actually do a jump move. So they can actually jump around an enemy unit like so. Now infantry can't do that. Now the Union have a special little ability that they can do, and if they're infantry or cavalry, it doesn't matter. But if they're moving downriver, and you can see the little down arrows like so, they're allowed to do a jump like so, as long as they're moving downriver. And the Union has sort of a decided water advantage. So the Union is also allowed to move port to port, and that's actually going to cost 1 movement piece per token here, not per whole space. So if I wanted to move these guys down to Fort Monroe, I could move them to here for 1, and then another movement point would get him down here. Now you can only move to friendly controlled spaces. However, if the Union rolls a 6, then they're allowed to do a naval invasion. So they are allowed then to move to any port, no matter what it is. So if I rolled a 6, I could use one of my movement points to invade here. Now if there was another unit here, I'd have to do battle with it. Otherwise I could move him here and then eventually take control at the end of my turn. So again, after movement, you're going to resolve any combat, and that's if there's 2 different groups of units from each side in the same spot. So let's talk about how combat works. First off, what you're going to do is you're going to remove the units from the space where there was combat, and then put this little token there to remind you where the combat actually happened on the board. So we're going to line these up sort of in a line, sort of somewhat similar to how they would have lined up in real life, where they would line up across a line, across a plain or a field, and then shot at each other. And this is actually somewhat similar to like a block war game. So if you played one of a block war game or something like that, it's somewhat similar to that. And also the movement seems somewhat similar, where you maybe play a card, in this case you roll a dice to see how many movement points you get, and you activate each area. And then you're going to line these up and you're going to attack each other. Now the defender is always going to attack first. And so in this case, let's say the South was a defender, he's going to target a specific thing. So you say, I'm going to attack with him to here. And he's going to roll a die, and he's going to check the number. So he wants to roll a 2 or less here. If he were to do that, if he were to roll a 2 or less, he would have gotten a hit, and this guy would have turned over, and then he's just basically damaged for a little bit, but he's still active. And then the next guy would have to target this one. Now, you can never target the same one twice unless you've targeted all of them first. So in this case, the South wouldn't get to do that. So I would target him with this guy, and then he would have to choose one of these other two. So then he would roll a die, and then he's going to miss. And then it'll be the Union's turn, in this case because they're the attacker, and then he's going to target him. He's going to roll a die, so he's going to get a hit. And then the next guy in line is going to target him, so let's say he attacks him, rolls a die, that's a miss. Now we've targeted every unit on that side, so this last guy can go ahead and try to get rid of him and target him. So he's going to roll a die, he's going to miss. Now if he had hit him, with a 2 or less, then this would be removed, and then it would go back to the player's recruiting box. So after you've had at least one round of combat from each side, then it's possible that one of the sides could retreat on their turn or bring in reinforcements. So here we've got a little fictional situation here where there's a battle here, there's a battle marker, pretend we've had one round of combat, and now the South wants to bring in reinforcements. Now he can bring in one reinforcement from each adjacent area. So in this case, if there were 2 down here, he could only bring in one from this side here, and then one from this side over here, and then they would join the battle on that turn. Now if you retreat, that basically has ceded victory to the opposite side, or if the opposite side had eliminated all your units, then that they would have won. Then the winning side can basically promote one of those units that was involved in battle. In addition, after all the combat's been resolved, we're going to go into a quick promotions and recruitment phase. So first let's talk about how promotions work. So this is a real interesting aspect of the game, the promotions and then the recruitment of the different units, as a way of kind of cycling through your units as they get sort of combat experience and then they get better. So when you promote a unit, you're going to take one of your basic units off the board, put it in your recruitment pool, which you're always going to start with just one of these weak cavalry units in, and that's the only thing you can actually recruit. And then you're going to replace it with the next step up. So here we've got our weakest infantry, and then in this case, if we promoted him, we would upgrade to one of our little stronger infantry. Now later on, we could promote this guy and upgrade him to a crack infantry unit with that little defense modifier like so. And so instead of putting him back in the recruit box, he's going to go back to our promotion pool. So you're going to want to cycle through your little guys here to get a lot of these guys out, and then after you do your promotion step, then you can recruit based on a die roll. So you're going to roll a die, and so here we rolled a 5, and you can see this says, can't see it, but it says if you roll a 5 or 6, that's basically a 4. So you can do 4 recruit points and then recruit these back out onto the board. So another use of getting to your upgraded and your crack units here is you can see this -1. So that means anything that is attacking it is actually going to reduce the amount that it needs to get when it attacks you. So if something with a 3 was attacking you like so, we had this level 3 unit here attacking him, then he would actually, instead of needing to roll a 3 or less, he'd need to roll a 2 or less. And that will also stack with these entrenchment markers here. So if he was in an entrenched area, he would apply an additional -1 to anything that was attacking him. Now you can recruit in any of your own recruitment cities, and those are just signified by a number. Now this is sort of a dual purpose feature here, these numbers. So anything with a number that you control that is also one of your cities, you can recruit in. And you can recruit 1 unit per recruitment city. So that's basically your turn structures. You're going to roll to move, and then you're going to do any combat, and then have a quick promotion and then recruitment step, and then the other player is going to take his turn, move, do combat, and you're going to go through the years and try to achieve victory. Well, how do you achieve victory? It's going to depend on which side you're playing. If you're the Union, it's a different rule, and then if you're the South, it's a different condition. So the first step into understanding these conditions is learning about how to control different areas. So if the turn had ended, if the Union's turn had ended, I should say, in a southern area, then we're going to go ahead and change the control of that, and that's going to be Union controlled. Now cavalry can actually control a space like so. So if I ended a turn with an infantry unit there, and then I moved out, I would still have control of it. But if I only had a cavalry unit there, then it would be under my control as long as he was there, but as soon as he moved away, it would revert it back immediately to Union control, or Confederate control. But as long as I have an infantry unit there, I end my segment, basically end my turn with him there, then I can place a control marker like so. So simply the Confederacy will win if they ever control Washington, D.C. They basically have sacked the capital, and they win. The other way that the Confederacy will win is if their maximum army size ever is above the Union's. And so the way that you do that is the Confederacy starts here at 29, the Union starts at 34, but then anytime you take over an opposing territory that has their recruitment number here, remember these are the cities that you can actually recruit people in, but if I was the Union and took this over, then I would decrease the Confederate maximum army size like so. But that's what you're going to want to control, and for a number of different reasons. One of the main reasons being that they can't recruit here because it's not under friendly control, and then it also is going to decrease their maximum army size. Finally, the Confederacy will win if we get to the 40th turn and the Union has not won. Well, how does the Union win? Well, the Union wins if it controls all 7 of the Confederacy's 2 recruiting cities. So you can see some of these have a 2, some of these have a 1, like Mobile and New Orleans each have a 2. So there's 7 of these. If the Union ever controls all 7 of those, then they're going to win immediately after that turn. Now here is somewhat of I believe it's a little bit of a flaw with the basic game. Because what can happen here is the Union, I think it's a stronger army, overall. But what the Confederacy could do is they could stack a giant army in the last space. So they could keep stacking units, building these up. And really, if they wanted to be a jerk and not be a fun person to play with, they could just do this from the beginning and build a giant stack that you would never be able to, beat down. And so that became pretty apparent in our first game, and it was like, well, why don't you just put all the guys there, and then I can never win, and then we could just, why keep playing the game? However, there's an optional rule, and I think that you really have to play with it, and it really adds a nice little dynamic to the game. So the optional rule is that you have to have conquered and controlled at least 6 of these 2-cost cities, and then finally surrounded the last one, the 7th one. So once that's sort of out of supply, then you can win, because basically you've just got them in sort of like a Jericho situation, and then they're surrounded. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the overview. Like I said at the beginning, this is really basic with the very most basic rules of the game, and it's very easy to add things like the command table to to do movement instead of just a straight die roll. Now if you do the straight die roll, you'll never roll a 1 that's automatically turned into a 2. But there's also advanced combat. So the advanced combat is kind of like you roll a die and then you look at that command table, and that's the amount of commands you can do basically over 8 days, or 4 days I should say. And then those are the amount of different attacks that you can do. You can also recover the units that were flipped over, maybe they were hit. So that gets a little bit more into the sort of quagmire of these types of battles that would happen in this in this era. But I really like how it's presented in the way that you can basically just get it out. There's a little 4-page basic rule book, a little pamphlet that you can just start playing and just go for it. And then as you become comfortable with the terrain and the movement and the different locations on the board, then you can kind of add in, kind of nooks and crannies and a little bit of spice to the game. And so I think that's nice for people. It's in a way that you can kind of investigate the subject, because you can learn about, they had the riots in 1863, they had the possibility of the foreign troops coming in. What else? They have basically this optional rule chart. I don't know how well you can see that, but you can see there's a ton of optional rules. And then down here in this corner over here, it tells you sort of a set of each of those optional rules that you can play with. So one is a little bit more historical, one's for a faster game, things like that. And so I really like how it's presented. And now there's a little bit of historical information about the different optional rules, and whether it's sort of pro-Union or pro-Confederacy, or if it's historical or alternate historical. And so I really like how that's presented in that way. And so with the advanced rules, just some examples. There's also there's supply. So if you have 2 recruiting cities that are from the same side, then if they are able to connect without any kind of interruption of troops, then that becomes a supply point. So anything that can connect back to that sort of grouping of cities then is considered in supply. So if you're out of supply, you maybe have to remove a troop and things like that. But you don't really have to play with that if you're playing with a novice wargamer who maybe has an interest in civil wars, but they don't really want to get too bogged down into these extra exceptions, and they want to really excited to get into the game. But then after you've played it, you can say, okay, well, let's add in this rule. Let's add in the riots. There's border state things. You can have battlefield morale. I didn't even talk about the leaders. There's actually 2 different ways you can use the leaders. In the basic combat, if you have a leader with a combat value of 3, you can choose before you attack to have him add a combat point to different units. Or you can have him add all 3 of his combat points to one unit to make sure you really take out maybe something on the other side. And then in the terms of the advanced combat, it basically adds that many more command actions to that. So normally you roll the dice in the command table for the advanced combat, and then you get that many more commands that you can execute. One thing that I would probably play with, even with the basic game, is when your unit takes damage and you flip it over, at the end of combat, no matter what happened, he's going to unflip and become full power. And that just doesn't really quite feel right to me. So one of the optional rules is that you can actually spend one of your recruitment points, instead of bringing out a new unit onto the board in one of their recruitment cities, you can actually flip up and sort of recover, one of those flip down units. And I really think that would probably be better. In closing, I would say I usually have an issue with a game that gives you like 80 ways to play it. For the most part. I mean, obviously there's scenarios with different games, since that doesn't really count. But when they start adding in like this rule, and then, you could use this rule if you feel like it, and this and that. But this game really presents itself, I think, in a straightforward, kind of truthful way, where it's like, here's a basic game. It says the basic rules are very basic. Use this to get in with novice wargamers, and then go ahead and add these as sort of extra thematic chrome. It's not like it doesn't know what it is. I think this game does know what it is, and it knows what it's trying to be. And I think that'd be cool if more war games were kind of presented maybe with a similar system to this. Now, I think a lot of this stuff actually works really well because of the war that it's covering. Just in terms of like the differences between the basic and the advanced combat, and how you basically set up a line of soldiers, and that's very much, you wouldn't really do that with a modern war, for example. Maybe, prehistorical wars, I'm not too up on that stuff, but basically this sort of thematic in the way that it makes sense to have these different battles, and the way that the chaos of the actions and the orders work. I think this war really fits this well. But I think it would be nice to see something else with different subject matter. The other people maybe are more into more modern war or more ancient warfare. And if it could present itself in like, here's a really simple sort of epic scale, over the whole course of the war, and then you can do very, very simple things that make thematic sense, but then here are a whole bunch of different alternate things you can add. So there's probably a ton of games like that, and I'm not a huge war gamer, but I just really liked how this was presented with, the sort of index and a little historical reasoning, and each of them had a nice example, and everything was very, very simple. I mean, even the advanced rules had a very simple overtone to them, and nothing really conflicted with each other. There wasn't a lot of, if I use this rule, then it turns off this other, piece of this other rule. There wasn't too much of that. I think there was probably one or two things, but it wasn't too bad. I can't really think of anything right now. But yeah, I really quite enjoy the game, and I have a little bit of a soft spot for this subject matter myself. My dad has read the Shelby, I don't know what they're called. They're like the giant book. It's like thousands of pages. He's read that like twice or something. So, we talk about Civil War stuff. He likes to talk about the munitions and all these little details and stuff like that. So anyway, yeah, I would definitely recommend this game if you're somebody that wants to get into a war game, has any interest in the subject matter. It's one thing, if you've never played a war game, I haven't played a whole lot of war games myself, but it can be kind of daunting to sort of see the map, see everything at the beginning, know what your objectives are, but then it's like, okay, what do I do? What's my first turn? So this is very easy though, with the streamlined rule set, to dive in, just start, moving your pieces around, and just, kind of seeing what happens and sort of developing the history as you're playing it. So anyway, definitely I recommend it. Thanks.